Okay, hello everybody. My name is Niklas Bildstein Zaar. I am the founder and creative director of an architecture practice called Sub. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm grateful to be invited by the world around. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge a few collaborators that has acknowledged some of the ideas that have been articulated in the presentation today. New Models, K. Alla McDowell, Jack Self, Shuman Bazaar, and Good Company. Sub is an architecture office founded in 2017 and based in Berlin. We practice design through synthesis of image, research, technology, and architecture. Our clients are considered active collaborators from the fields of art, fashion, music, and commerce, in ongoing exploration of contemporary rituals. Our studio comprises practitioners from an array of disciplines and cultures. Through our projects, we simultaneously address several scales spanning both time and space. We consider media material that we blend and layer seamlessly with physical materials in the project that we design. In today's talk, I would like to focus on a part of our practice that falls under the category of ephemeral architecture. Spaces whose temporal and transient nature enables them to operate in narrative devices. I like to refer to this as stagecraft, architecture storytelling. I'll primarily be covering the typologies of exhibition design and fashion shows as a general introduction of who we are, how we work, and the way we think. It's my first time doing this, I'm a little bit nervous. The title of today's talk is Manticore, a creature out of folklore, a legendary creature comprised of multiple parts from different animals. Just as the Manticore is a hybrid of seemingly disparate parts, our design process is a meshwork of disciplines, attempting to transcend the limitations of binary thinking. Myths are a part of every culture in the world and are used to explain natural phenomena, where a certain people come from, how their civilization developed, and why things happen as they do. At their most basic level, myths comfort by giving a sense of order and meaning to what can sometimes seem a chaotic world. The purpose of myths is to provide a foundational truth that allows for interpretation. In other words, they can operate as narrative structures and consensus in our collective imaginary, storytelling templates onto which to project our own lives. This is a goat man. I'm not a trained architect. In fact, I dropped out of school at a very young age. However, instead of being a committed student, I was a hardcore gamer. In particular, I had an affinity towards MMORPG games, mass online role-playing games. It was these virtual worlds that offered me a foundational understanding to world building and informs still today how I look at design. As I later in life started pursuing architecture, I naturally tended to look at all modalities of building worlds through an egalitarian lens as a consequence of my early years spent in front of a screen. CAD and 3D modeling softwares still today look like game engines in my eyes. And there's a correlation between multiplayer games and social media platforms that I find very interesting. The world is a complicated place. The lines between the real and the virtual, information and misinformation, original and modified content becomes increasingly obscured, challenging us to navigate a landscape where multiple interpretations coexist. Platforms, echo chambers, multipolarities, accelerating technologies present a constant state of flux where our language doesn't keep up with the various new phenomena that arises. I've spent a great deal of time scraping online forums like Twitter, Reddit, and Discord, trying to identify where the world is heading, interpolating this with conventional broadcast media in order to imagine some kind of screen recording of the world, which is arguably an impossible task. I recognize, of course, how media-centric this approach is, but it impacts many of our lives. I think we all carry this need of making sense of the noise. What I'm explaining has functioned as a raw material and inspiration to our design practice. Can we identify a common denominator of our moment in time and represent that in space? What do people find relevant in a world where images are constantly making and unmaking themselves? What are the systems we operate within? Can we understand them better? Do we have the ability to question our own frameworks? Are we honest enough to address various complicities within our own design practices? Ultimately, we're faced with our own behaviors. It's simple. And it is here a lot of answers lie to the various questions we wish to address through design and architecture. But we need to understand ourselves in order to understand our surroundings, and we need to understand what influences us and informs our behavior. Deep down, we sense that the world we must navigate operates differently from what we see, and yet it's unclear exactly how. People are ultimately guided by emotions, not intellectual propositions. It's important that the projects we design hold a degree of immediacy, and that any intellectual endeavor is more of an emergent property, where calibrated themes and contradictions, like layers unfold the longer you stay within the space. Sometimes, the simple gesture of inverting rational conditions can have an immense impact. Visuals of water reflecting on the surface of water feels visceral and dreamlike. For this scenography, we designed sunken submerged bleachers in a black box with a vast kinetic LED screen suspended above. There is an intentionality here to the medium of the message. Are we speaking about the climate? Because one could argue that this theme is in conflict with the format of a fashion show itself. How can discourse around climate manifest itself in a fashion show? Isn't that hypocrisy? Or does the tension of merging climate discourses with fashion show speak on the topic even louder than it would if presented in another format? For our studio, the guiding design idea was the concept of a black box, something that has observable inputs and outputs, yet incomprehensible inner workings. The latent space where dreams and fears and desires fluidly intermingle. In order to stage experiences where feelings can exist in the foreground, we need to work very hard to make everything seem seamless. These projects are the outcomes of extensive testing, analysis, and technical engineering. We relentlessly try to eliminate all elements that do not hold a function or that distract from the primary narrative. It takes a lot of calculative energy to make something feel effortless. In the case of this project, how to level the surface of the basin that held the water was a challenge. We also didn't know if the water would be able to give the impression being infinitely deep. Ideas of adding pigment was discussed but later abandoned. Sometimes I forget, but the entire purpose of the space is to work as a runway for the models. So the water could only be half an inch deep. We resolve these open questions by always building small mock-ups of the spaces. There are too many variables that can go wrong, so everything needs to be tested and proved. And all of our projects tend to be kind of different, so each one comes with its own challenges, and this can sort of be a dirty job sometimes. We have worked closely with the artist Anne Imhoff over multiple years. Working with artists requires another kind of mindset and a collaborative format. Anne Imhoff's exhibition, Nature Morte, was the 5th iteration of the Carte Blanche series at Palais de Tokyo. It occupied the majority of the 20,000 square meters museum surface, which was originally constructed for the 1937 Exposition Internationale. The show comprised both the artist's own works alongside selection of other works by more than 30 other artists, such as Eugène Delacroix, Giovanni Battista Paranesi, and Katie Noland. Together, the works represented a diversity of media, from painting to performance and sound pieces. The exhibition design began with the removal of all non-permanent partitions, reverting the interior of the museum to its stripped-down state immediately after the 2001 renovation by Lacaton and Vassal. 250 insulated glass units, many covered in graffiti, were extracted from a facade of a deteriorating bank in Turin prior to its demolition and shipped to Paris. Mounted on steel and concrete plinths, the glass walls served as scenographic infrastructure, creating and delineating pathways of the visitors. Additional elements taken or inspired by civic infrastructure were also introduced to further define the scenography. The movement of visitors followed the trajectory from the bright ground floor of the museum into a cavernous basement, with exhibition design serving to structure a sequence that recalled the ritualistic descent underground. The entire exhibition had a liminal quality about it, and Imhoff, who is predominantly known for performance work, only had performances within the exhibition over a few days of its total duration. However, when her cast of performers were not present, the visitors could sense the remnants of something taking place or about to begin. The static performative debris remained activated. In the same way, this project actively captured the imagination of its visitors in a static form. The Balenciaga Couture headquarters is located at 10 to 12 Avenue Georges V, at the same address where Chrysler Balenciaga operated between 1937 and 1968. In the decades after it closed, the building underwent extensive modernization. The design strategy was driven by an attempt to restore the original character of the building, a conceit that required rethinking the meaning of originality to produce a deceptive replica of the former space using archival materials as reference. As seen here, the second floor salon featured sculptured gypsum arabesques, framing doorways and mirrors, treated with a flat and dusty white finish and accentuated with duchesse curtains. The space is structured in an enfilade of rooms in accordance to the original layout. All surfaces feature various aging treatments, as if the space was left untouched since 1968, offering a fictional narrative as if the salon had been there all along, forgotten and now found. We worked with patination artists who usually work with restoration, but we tasked them to work in reverse. The outcome was a tattered fictional facsimile. At odds with the salon above, the ground floor of the building houses the couture store. It comprises two smoked glass volumes that were inserted into the reconstructed Haussmannian facade, establishing a stark contrast between the historic architecture and the interior. Inside, vitrines fitted with pneumatic hardware doors and light-filtering technical glass housed the couture garments and framed the naked walls of the original building, at once exposing and protecting the bare wall surfaces. The audience is always active participants in the spaces we design. With our design strategies, I hope to generate an awareness of the audience's own agency, but this is not always so evident. In doing so, we need to operate as schemers and plotters. This is when stagecraft holds another meaning beyond its theatrical association. The scenography for the Balenciaga Summer 20 show comprised 500 seats assembled into an elliptical double spiral. All surfaces were monochrome, saturated in European Union blue. From the wall-to-wall carpeting to the floor-to-ceiling velvet curtains. The design approximated Parliament, acting as a spatial extension of Balenciaga's investigation of power dressing. This was the first show we ever designed. During this period, we actually coincided with this show actually coincided with the date of the UK leaving the European Union. It represented a big identity shift for my generation, and I wanted to try to capture this feeling that was at the tip on everyone's tongue, present yet unarticulated. As the audience entered, there's really only one thing to do: take your seat. However, just by taking your seat, you actively participate in the ceremonies of the parliamentary spaces that were being referenced. In the way of laying a trap, by positioning the bait, in this case the seat, we took advantage of the audience's own natural tendencies against themselves, attempting to blur the reality of watching a fashion show by echoing the ritual that you're getting seated in one of the great halls of politics. A kind of subliminal entrapment where the movement of your body becomes a bridge between your present reality and your imagination. This feeling of immersion might be subtle. Most people probably don't even notice it, but it was designed with these thoughts at hand, an unconscious and silent plot. What you see in front of you here is an artificial weather machine. It was designed for Balenciaga's Winter 22 show. The scenography is comprised by a brightly illuminated circular field covered with artificial snow. But the show was not about simulated weather. The blizzard was merely a consequence to another design intent we wish to explore. Who is the protagonist of these spaces? Who can play with those conditions? And how do we play with those conditions? Sometimes even reversing those dynamics over time. Audience, performer, player, and participant. We all take various roles within the spaces that we inhabit. The show featured models walking amidst a simulated blizzard that grew in intensity as the show progressed. A curved glass wall separated the audience, seated in 2 rows in a darkened corridor. From the environmental simulation, which included atmospheric effects such as wind and fog, as well as lighting design that accentuated the show's dramatic arc, we used the same vendor that engineered the glass facade for Apple Campus 2. The materials, colors, and composition of space was there to emulate a kind of analog smartphone, where the blackness of the glass that separated the audience from the performance functioned as a screen in multiple senses of the word. The clear separation between the simulated storm and the protection of the seating gallery intended to emphasize the audience's active role as a voyeur. The way the effects were integrated into space offered a kind of verisimilitude or plausibility. I was told afterwards that the audience didn't reflect on how the weather conditions were created, and think this is one of the ultimate goals of stagecraft: lifelikeness and believability. This is a really good segment that I'm waiting for. There we go. Like a mythological creature that's comprised by many different parts and with physical attributes, so are our minds able to hold multiple contradictory ideas and thoughts at the same time, constantly attempting to draw correlations between what we see and what we sense. Like a generative image model, our minds jump between various assumptions in different levels of resolution. The interplay of semantics and semiotics are beautifully illustrated here within Touch Designer, a node-based visual programming language for real-time interactive multimedia content. I like the idea that we now have a visual representation of a thought that is not fully rendered. Again, an abstraction given a visual anchoring. These particular generative aesthetics presented here now feel ancient in comparison to the recent releases of models like OpenAI's Sora, but they're kind of a part of AI history. The human tendency of absorbing oneself in the lives of others takes an uncanny spin when we are fed back with artificial deepfakes of ourselves that have been mimetically trained on how we behave. It doesn't matter if the person thing actually exists, the concept exists, or the affective zone exists, and can be triggered so long as the image contains enough info to point to a certain part of the network. By studying computer vision, we managed to extract movement patterns by developing control nets that we fed with video from content creation platforms like TikTok. This became a previously uncharted raw materiality. We manipulated this source of material to create new synthetic influencers, which we also prompted to change clothes and morph between gender representation to highlight their artifice. These generative workflows were the building blocks of the Balenciaga Winter 24 show. The show was a long corridor that connected itself. The amount of LED panels we used had more video output than the Sphere in Las Vegas, but was assembled at a fraction of the time. The entrance condition was a concrete environment where we had simulated daylight and shadows slowly moving across the set. What is real and what is not? In this bright new world, we become both creators and our audiences, generating and consuming an endless flow of content. However, anchoring at the stream are stars, algorithmic beacons, with enough attentional gravity to shape large online networks. The show's design played into this by creating a scenario in which the concentration of high-profile identities devirtualize together, only to find themselves trapped in the literal screen space to everyone's amusement. And so, as realities are blending into one another, images are blending into one another, we exist within the confluence of data, sentiment, objects, environments, and people. In our studio's attempt of harnessing any medium as a tool for potential manipulation in the spaces that we design, what emerges is a kind of feedback loop. The investigation and excavation of sociocultural tropes embedded within the contemporary, the deconstruction and reconfiguration of these media and materials into spatial expressions where the intent is to shed light on our moment in time, shows us how we are merely nodes in a broader network. There's always a bigger plot. We mimic mythologies, we mimic each other, and now, with emergent synthetic agents trained on mimicking us, they are, in their turn, making us mimic them. In order to capture these oblique and volatile dynamics in the world, it becomes evident the necessity of operating at the nexus of several disciplines that extend beyond the traditional architecture as we know it. In order to design something meaningful, we need to understand the world we inhabit. We need to embody the Manticore. And as you leave the summit today, I'd like for you to reflect on, and through everything that you do, community, politics, culture, and architecture, who is prompting who? Thank you.